In a small rural town in Montana, where gossip traveled faster than the wind across open fields, Clara Whitmore became a name people spoke in hushed voices. She was known not for wrongdoing, but for tragedy. After her husband died suddenly in a workplace accident, her own family began to see her as a burden, an unlucky shadow they wanted gone. In their narrow thinking, Clara's grief was shameful, her independence threatening. They decided the best way to teach her humility was to send her away as unpaid help to a distant rancher named Jacob Hale. Jacob Hale lived alone on a worn but honest ranch at the edge of town. He was quiet, broad-shouldered, and carried loneliness like a second skin. After years of working the land by himself, he had stopped expecting kindness from people. When Clara's family approached him with their offer, free labor in exchange for food and shelter, Jacob felt uneasy. He didn't like the way they spoke about her, as if she were a problem to be discarded. Still, the ranch needed help, and he reluctantly agreed. Clara arrived on a dusty afternoon with one small suitcase and a calm expression that didn't match the cruelty of her circumstances. She was dressed simply, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes tired but steady. Jacob expected bitterness or tears. Instead, she introduced herself politely and thanked him for taking her in. That unexpected gratitude caught him off guard. He showed her the small room near the kitchen and explained the work honestly: long days, hard labor, no luxury. Clara nodded, saying only that she was ready. From the very first evening, Clara worked as if the ranch were her own. She cooked a warm meal without complaint, cleaned quietly, and asked thoughtful questions about the land. Jacob watched her from a distance, unsure what to make of her. He had been warned she was difficult, yet she showed nothing but patience and discipline. When he offered her rest, she smiled softly and said working helped her keep her thoughts in order. That night, as Jacob sat alone on the porch, he realized the house felt different. The silence was no longer empty, it was peaceful. Clara, lying awake in her small room, stared at the wooden ceiling, feeling the ache of rejection settle deep in her chest. Yet for the first time since her husband's death, she felt something unfamiliar: relief. No shouting, no judgment, no blame. Just honest work and quiet space to breathe. Neither of them knew it yet, but that single day marked the beginning of a life-changing journey. What Clara's family intended as punishment had brought two wounded souls together, both unaware that fate was gently rewriting their stories on a lonely Montana ranch. The days on Jacob Hale's ranch followed a steady rhythm, shaped by sunrise, hard work, and the wide Montana sky. Clara adapted quickly, as if she had always belonged to the land. She learned the names of the horses, repaired torn saddle straps, and helped mend fences with careful hands that had once only known household chores. Though the work was exhausting, she never complained. Instead, she treated every task with quiet focus, finding comfort in routine. Jacob noticed the changes almost immediately. Meals were prepared with care, not extravagance, but warmth. The house no longer felt like a place he merely slept in, it felt lived in. Clara brought order without control, kindness without expectation. She respected Jacob's silence, never pushing him to talk, yet always listening when he did. That balance stirred something in him he had long buried: trust. The town, however, was not as kind. Word spread quickly that Jacob had taken in a punished widow. Some neighbors hinted he was being foolish, others warned him that women like Clara brought trouble. At the supply store, Jacob overheard mocking remarks and cold laughter. He said nothing, but the words followed him home like dust on his boots. Clara sensed the shift in his mood and understood without being told. She had lived with judgment long enough to recognize its weight. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered suddenly, and a violent storm swept across the ranch. Strong winds tore through the fields, knocking down part of the old fence that kept the cattle secure. Without hesitation, Clara grabbed her coat and followed Jacob into the rain. Mud clung to her dress, her hands blistered as they worked side by side, hammering posts and tying wire while thunder cracked overhead. Jacob shouted for her to go back inside, but she refused. She stood firm, soaked and shaking, determined to help protect what mattered. When the storm finally passed, both of them were exhausted. Standing there in the quiet aftermath, Jacob looked at Clara with new eyes. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't a burden. She was strong in a way that didn't demand attention. In that moment, his respect for her deepened into admiration. That evening, as Clara dried her hair by the fire, Jacob brought her a cup of hot coffee. Their fingers brushed briefly, and something unspoken passed between them. Clara smiled, not out of obligation, but genuine warmth. For the first time since her loss, she felt useful, not tolerated. For Jacob, the realization settled slowly but firmly. Clara's presence had transformed more than his home. It had begun to heal parts of him he thought were beyond repair. The ranch stood quietly under the clearing sky, unaware that within its weathered walls, two lonely lives were moving closer together, shaped by shared hardship and growing respect. As the months passed, life on the ranch settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and transformative. Clara's presence was no longer just helpful, it became essential. She knew when Jacob needed space and when he needed company, reading his moods with an intuition born of shared silence and small gestures. She had a way of making the vast, lonely ranch feel like a home rather than a place of work, filling the corners with warmth and quiet laughter. Jacob found himself looking forward to her stories of the small moments in town, or the rare nights when they could sit on the porch, watching the stars together. One evening, as autumn leaves turned golden, Clara's family arrived unannounced. They had heard about her work at the ranch and, seeing some opportunity, demanded money and apologies from her. They acted as if their cruelty had been deserved, as if they had the right to reclaim her life. Jacob stood by the doorway, arms crossed, and watched as Clara confronted them. For once, she didn't flinch. "I don't belong to you anymore," she said steadily, her voice calm but firm. "You sent me here to punish me, and yet, I found a life worth living. I have no debt to repay you." Her family's faces twisted with disbelief, but Jacob's expression was unreadable. He stepped forward, his voice low and unwavering. "She belongs here. She's done nothing wrong. Whatever you think, she is not your burden to carry." Clara's chest tightened as she realized the magnitude of his words. For years, she had carried shame like a heavy cloak, believing she was unlucky or cursed. But now, here was Jacob, defending her not out of obligation, but because he saw her true worth. The fear of rejection that had shadowed her entire life began to lift, replaced by a sense of belonging she had never known. That night, after her family left in silence, Clara shared pieces of her story with Jacob. She spoke of the loneliness, the grief, and the subtle cruelty that had defined her life since her husband's death. She admitted she had expected judgment, even from him. But Jacob listened without interruption, without pity, simply listening with quiet understanding. When she finished, he nodded. "You've been through more than most could bear," he said softly. "And yet, here you are. Stronger, wiser, and still kind. I've watched you turn this place into more than a ranch. You've turned it into home, for both of us." Clara's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a faint, fluttering hope. She realized she was no longer defined by loss or misfortune. In Jacob's steady presence, she found acceptance, respect, and, quietly, love. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. The judgment of the past no longer held power over her, and the future, once uncertain and frightening, now shimmered with possibility. On that quiet Montana ranch, two broken hearts had found the courage to trust again, and the beginnings of a love neither of them had expected but both had longed for. Winter arrived on the Montana ranch with a quiet, relentless beauty. Snow blanketed the fields in soft white, and the cold wind swept through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and frost. The harsh season tested both the land and those who worked it, but Clara and Jacob faced it together, side by side. Their partnership had grown beyond work and routine. It had become a shared life, built on trust, understanding, and quiet affection. One morning, as the sun rose over the frozen horizon, Jacob found Clara in the barn, brushing the horses' coats, her breath visible in the cold air. She smiled at him, and in that simple moment, he realized how deeply she had become a part of his world. No one had ever brought such warmth into his home, or such light into his heart. For years, he had believed that love and companionship were luxuries he could no longer afford. Clara had proven otherwise. After breakfast, they walked together to check the fences and feed the livestock. Clara moved with grace and strength, laughing at her own clumsy slip on the icy path. Jacob chuckled, feeling the joy of her presence ripple through him like sunlight over snow. The ranch, once a place of solitude and hard labor, now felt alive. Each task, from mending fences to hauling firewood, was infused with a sense of purpose and partnership. That evening, by the fire in the modest living room, Jacob finally spoke the words he had been carrying in his heart. "Clara," he began, his voice low but steady, you've turned this house into a home and my life into something I never expected. I can't imagine a future without you." Clara's eyes filled with tears, a mix of surprise, relief, and something deeper she had long tried to deny. "Jacob," she whispered, "I never thought I'd find a place where I belonged, a life where I'm wanted, not punished. You've given me that." He took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against the chill of winter, and said simply, "Stay with me. Not as a worker, not as someone sent here to be punished, but as family, as my partner." She nodded, words failing her for the first time in years. In that moment, everything felt right. The loneliness that had haunted both of them melted away like snow under the morning sun. They were no longer two wounded souls drifting in the cold, they were a family, bound by respect, care, and love. The town's whispers slowly changed over the months. People who had mocked Jacob for taking in a punished widow, now watched with quiet admiration as Clara became a valued part of the community. Her kindness, intelligence, and strength earned her respect, and Jacob's steadfast support of her only deepened the admiration. As winter settled fully over the ranch, Clara and Jacob stood together on the porch, looking out over the fields they had nurtured. The past, with all its pain and injustice, no longer had power over them. What had begun as punishment and rejection had transformed into the greatest gift either of them had ever received: a home, a family, and a love that was steadfast and true. On that quiet Montana ranch, two hearts that had once been broken now beat together, resilient and unshakable, ready to face the future hand in hand.